At 8:10, the old family kitchen still had a Sunday feeling in it, though the afternoon had already slipped away. The phone was face down on the kitchen island. For once, it was quiet. No buzzing. No voice asking where something was, or what time someone would get there, or whether anything had been taken care of yet. Under the soft light, a worn house key rested near the edge of the counter. Beside the faucet stood the one everyone still called the boss, even now, even as a grandparent, even with hands in warm dishwater and a towel folded over one shoulder. They did not say much. Maybe they never had. You stood nearby, not fixing anything. The room did not change. The old thing stayed old. But something in the silence felt less hard than before. There was still water in the sink, gone cloudy from plates and forks and the last pan someone had left to soak. The faucet gave a small drip now and then, not enough to matter, only enough to keep the room from becoming completely still. The kitchen island held the remains of the day. A folded napkin. A plastic container with one corner of dessert left inside. A pair of reading glasses pushed near the mail. And that worn house key, lying by itself, as if someone had emptied a pocket and forgotten how much history could fit in one small piece of metal. It was not shiny anymore. Its edges had softened from years of being turned in locks, pressed into palms, dropped in drawers, carried through winters, carried through ordinary errands. It had probably been held while groceries were balanced against one hip. It had probably been searched for in coat pockets. It had probably been set down on this very counter during so many Sundays that no one thought to count them. The person beside you kept washing dishes. They were still called the boss, sometimes jokingly, sometimes not. There were old habits in a family that did not ask permission to stay. Someone had once looked to them for answers, for timing, for permission, for the way the room should move. Even now, as a grandparent, with sleeves pushed up and fingers in the warm water, something about them still made the kitchen arrange itself around their quietness. They did not say much. A plate passed under the water. A spoon clicked against the side of the sink. Their hands moved with the kind of memory that did not need attention. Rinse. Wipe. Set aside. Reach again. The house had been louder earlier. People had come through with paper plates and half-finished stories. Someone had laughed too hard at the doorway. Someone had checked a message and stepped into the hall. Someone had asked where the foil was, where the serving spoon went, whether anyone wanted more coffee. For a while, the phone kept ringing. It rang with the outside world, with other people's needs, with names that pulled the room away from itself. It rang until the sound became part of the afternoon, the way the refrigerator hum was part of the walls. Then, finally, it stopped. Now it lay face down near the island, its black screen catching the soft light and giving nothing back. The quiet came slowly. Not like a door closing. More like a hand loosening around something it had been holding all day. The kitchen did not become peaceful all at once. It still had crumbs near the cutting board. It still had a damp dish towel hanging unevenly from the oven handle. It still had chairs pushed back at wrong angles and a trash bag that would need to be taken out later. Nothing looked fixed. The old family patterns were still there. The careful comments. The things no one asked about. The way one person could say almost nothing and still fill a room. The way another person could stand nearby, wanting to be close, but not knowing what closeness was supposed to sound like after so many years of short answers and practical care. So you stood there. Not far away, not quite beside them either. Close enough to hear the water shift when they reached for another plate. Close enough to see the small crease near their wrist, the plain movement of an aging hand, the quiet strength that had spent years showing itself through doing rather than saying. Maybe that was how love had lived here. Not always warmly. Not always clearly. Sometimes it came in the form of a locked door checked twice at night. Sometimes in a ride offered without explanation. Sometimes in dishes washed after everyone else wandered into the living room. Sometimes in a key kept on the counter because someone was expected to come back. The key stayed there under the light. It looked ordinary enough to disappear into the rest of the room. But tonight it seemed to hold more than entry. It held the old way people returned here, even when they arrived tired, even when they brought little with them except a bag, a story, a silence, or a need they did not know how to name. The boss rinsed another dish and set it in the rack. They did not turn toward you. They did not soften in any obvious way. There was no speech that made the room new. No apology came forward. No perfect sentence arrived to gather up the years and place them gently where they belonged. Still, the air near the sink had changed a little. Maybe it was only the late hour. Maybe it was the soft light over the island, or the fact that the phone had finally stopped asking for the room's attention. Maybe it was the key, old and worn, resting there like proof that people had been coming and going from this place for longer than any one conversation could explain. The water ran warm. For a moment, standing near someone who said very little did not feel like standing outside a closed door. It felt more like standing beside an old door that had opened and closed so many times it no longer made much sound. And in that small quiet, the ordinary ways people tried to love did not feel so small. The old kitchen had a way of keeping track of people without making a display of it. There were marks on the island where knives had slipped, where hot pans had been set down too quickly, where someone had pressed too hard while writing a list. Near one corner, the finish had worn thin from years of elbows and coffee cups and folded newspapers. No one noticed it in photographs because no one photographed that part of the room. That was where the key sat. Not in the center. Not arranged carefully. Just near the edge, beside a damp ring left by a glass, where the light made the metal look tired and almost warm. You looked at it because looking at the person beside you felt too direct. They were still at the sink, still working through the last of the dishes with that quiet, practical patience. The kind of patience that was not soft on the surface. The kind that could sound like a cabinet closing, a short answer from another room, a car starting early in the morning before anyone else had shoes on. For years, maybe, that was easy to miss. A person can live close to care and still not recognize it right away. Especially when care comes without softness around the edges. Especially when it arrives as a ride, a repaired hinge, a paid bill, a porch swept before company comes, a kitchen cleaned after everyone has already started talking somewhere else. The boss had always been better at doing than explaining. Even now, they did not fill the silence. They did not ask what you were thinking. They did not make the moment easier by naming it. They only took the last plate from the water, rubbed one thumb along the rim, rinsed it clean, and placed it carefully in the rack. The movement was plain. It had probably been plain for years. That was the strange thing about old memories. They do not always return as whole scenes. Sometimes they come back through a hand under running water. Through the smell of dish soap. Through the dull click of a key touching the counter. Through someone standing near you, saying very little, while the whole room seems to remember more than either of you can say. Outside the kitchen, the rest of the house had lowered itself. A chair creaked in the living room. Someone laughed once, quietly, then stopped. The refrigerator turned on with a small shudder. The phone stayed face down, and because it stayed that way, the room had a different shape. It was not waiting to be interrupted. The evening had gathered itself around the sink. It was hard to know what had softened. Nothing had been solved. The old family kitchen was still the old family kitchen. People still carried their usual ways of protecting themselves. Some words had stayed missing for so long that they had become part of the furniture. Still, the air did not feel as sharp. Maybe age does that to certain memories. Not all at once. Not in a clean, easy way. But sometimes the years step back just far enough for a person to see the effort inside what once felt only hard. The key had scratches along its side. You could imagine it in their hand years ago, when they came home from work and walked straight into whatever needed doing. Maybe a child was waiting with a school paper. Maybe a pot was boiling over. Maybe someone had left shoes in the hallway. Maybe the phone was ringing then, too, and they answered with the same tired voice they used for everything. There may have been warmth underneath it. Not the kind that knew how to announce itself. Not the kind that turned into long talks at the kitchen table. Just a stubborn, ordinary warmth that kept showing up in small duties, in closed doors checked, in dishes washed, in someone making sure the house could keep going one more day. The faucet stopped. The boss reached for the towel on their shoulder and dried their hands slowly. For a moment, they stood very still beside you. Not close enough for a hug. Not far enough to feel gone. The old quiet stayed between you. But it was not empty. It held the sound of water settling in the pipes. It held the soft light over the island. It held the worn house key and the years of being let in, sent out, waited for, and welcomed back in ways that did not always sound like welcome. Then they picked up the key. Only for a second. They moved it away from the damp spot and set it on a dry part of the counter, as if that small thing mattered. As if even an old key deserved not to sit in water. No one said anything about it. But something in you noticed. After that, the kitchen became quieter in a different way. Not silent. A family kitchen almost never becomes silent. It keeps a few sounds for itself after everyone leaves. A pipe ticks somewhere behind the wall. The refrigerator starts and stops. A cabinet door rests a little open because no one pushed it all the way in. But the room no longer seemed to be asking for anything. The boss stood at the island now, drying the last plate with a towel that had been washed so many times the pattern had faded. Their shoulders were slightly bent forward, not from sadness exactly, but from years of reaching, lifting, carrying, leaning over sinks, leaning over counters, bending toward what needed to be done. They placed the plate in the cabinet. Then they stayed there a moment, hands still near the handle. It was such a small pause that anyone else might have missed it. In a louder room, it would have disappeared. In the middle of children running through, a television turned up, someone asking about leftovers, someone else looking for their keys, it would have been nothing. But now it had room. You saw it. You saw the way a person can spend so many years being the one who knows where things go, and then one evening stand in front of a cabinet as if the whole house has become a little heavier than usual. Not too heavy. Just heavy enough. The worn key was still on the island. They had moved it away from the damp place, and now it rested in a small clear patch under the light. There were crumbs around it. A thin line of water near the sink. The phone face down, almost forgotten, its dark screen quiet at last. That key seemed to belong to more than the door. It belonged to all the returns that had happened without ceremony. People coming in hungry. People leaving angry. People forgetting something and coming back through the side door. People standing in this kitchen with coats still on, saying they could only stay a minute, then staying longer because someone had put food on a plate. The old kitchen had held all of that. It had held the boss when they were younger, maybe sharper, maybe quicker to answer before anyone finished speaking. It had held their tiredness before anyone called it tiredness. It had held the small ways they tried, even when their trying sounded like instructions, or silence, or the clatter of a dish being put away too firmly. The memory did not become perfect. It only became wider. There was room now for the hard parts and the ordinary care to sit near each other without fighting for the whole story. There was room for the short answers. Room for the cleaned counter. Room for the warmth that did not know how to sound warm. Room for the years when love came through a locked door, a full sink, a fixed step, a ride home, a plate covered and left on the stove. The boss picked up the phone, turned it slightly, then set it back down without looking. That small refusal felt gentle. Not dramatic. Not even noticeable from the next room. But for one breath, they did not answer anything. They did not become available again. They let the house stay soft around them. Then they leaned both hands on the island. The light above them was old too, the kind that made every surface look a little more forgiving. It did not brighten the room so much as gather it. The worn places in the wood looked warmer under it. The key looked less like something forgotten and more like something kept. You stood on the other side of the island. There was no clear thing to say. Not after years of saying too little, or saying the wrong thing, or choosing practical words because tender ones felt too exposed. A sentence could have made the moment smaller. So you stayed there with the soft light between you, and with the quiet evidence of what had been done. A plate washed. A counter cleared. A key moved out of the water. Maybe that was all the room could hold for now. And maybe it was enough, not because everything had become easy, but because nothing had to become easy for the warmth to be real. It could be small. It could be late. It could arrive beside an old memory, after the phone went quiet, while someone who had spent a lifetime doing what needed doing stood near the sink and said almost nothing. For once, that almost nothing did not feel like absence. It felt like someone still there. There are memories that loosen only after the room has become quiet enough. Not because anyone asks them to. Not because anyone finds the right words. They loosen the way steam leaves a sink after the water has stopped running, slowly and without needing to be seen. The boss stayed at the island with both hands resting on the wood. Their fingers were still damp near the nails. A little soap scent held on to the air. Behind them, the faucet gave one last drop into the basin, and then even that sound was gone. You could hear the house breathing again. A floorboard answered someone shifting in another room. The refrigerator hummed low and steady. Somewhere down the hall, a door clicked softly, not closing anyone out, only settling into its frame. The phone stayed face down, and for once, nobody reached for it. That felt like mercy, almost. Not a grand kind. Not the kind anyone would name. Just the small mercy of a room allowed to stay itself for a few minutes, without being pulled apart by voices coming from somewhere else. The worn key sat between you. It had been moved out of the damp place, and now it looked as if it had always belonged under that light. Its teeth were dull. The round part had a small dark patch where thumbs must have pressed it for years. It was the kind of object a person uses so often that it stops being an object and becomes part of the hand. Maybe that was why it carried so much. Not in a loud way. It did not explain the family. It did not forgive anyone. It did not repair the old conversations, or bring back the afternoons when someone might have said something kinder and did not. It only stayed there. A small piece of metal that had opened the same door again and again. You remembered coming into this kitchen when you were younger, when the room felt larger and the boss seemed to know everything. Where the extra paper towels were. Which drawer held the twist ties. How long to leave something in the oven. Who needed to be called. Which bill was due. Which cousin was coming by. Which light should be turned off before bed. It was easy, then, to think that knowing was the same as being unreachable. A person who always has an answer can seem far away. A person who keeps moving can seem as if they are not feeling anything. A person who washes dishes while others talk can seem uninterested, when maybe they are only keeping their hands where tenderness cannot embarrass them. The boss looked toward the sink. They did not speak. But their quiet had a different weight now. It was not only a wall. It was also a way of standing through years when no one had taught them how to be soft out loud. That thought did not excuse everything. It did not need to. The old hard places were still old. Some memories still had their corners. Some silences still had names under them, even if nobody used those names in the kitchen. There were still things that had been missed, and things that had been carried alone, and things that did not become harmless just because time had passed. But beside the key, under that one soft light, the story seemed less narrow. The room made space for more than one truth. There had been shortness. There had been care. There had been distance. There had been the porch light. There had been words no one knew how to say. There had been dinner kept warm under foil, rides given in bad weather, dishes washed after birthdays, doors locked at night, and someone standing at the sink long after the laughter moved elsewhere. The boss reached for the towel again and wiped one small circle of water from the island. It was such an ordinary gesture. Almost nothing. Their hand moved once, then again, clearing a place no one had asked them to clear. And there it was, the old way. Care arriving without announcement. Maybe this was why the moment felt softer, even though nothing had been fixed. The softness was not coming from a perfect change. It was coming from seeing the old gesture while standing close enough to feel its tiredness. You did not have to make the memory beautiful. You only had to let it be wider than the pain it once carried. The boss folded the towel and laid it near the sink. Then they stood beside you, shoulder turned slightly toward the island, eyes resting somewhere near the key. For a few seconds, neither of you moved. The quiet did not ask for more. Later, when the last dish had been put away, the kitchen seemed to hold its breath. Not tightly. Not with fear. Just in that old house way, when the people inside it have finally stopped moving for a while, and the rooms remember the shape of everyone who passed through. The soft light over the island was still on. Everything beyond it had gone dimmer. The corners of the kitchen had fallen back into shadow. The sink was empty now, except for a shine of water along the metal. A towel lay folded near the faucet. The phone stayed face down where it had been, no longer the center of anything. The worn key was still there. It looked smaller now that the work was done. During all the washing and wiping, it had seemed to gather meaning because the room kept moving around it. Now, with the kitchen almost still, it looked like what it was, an old house key on an old counter, used so many times that nobody had thought to call it precious. Maybe that was why it mattered. Precious things are not always protected behind glass. Sometimes they are dropped into coat pockets with loose change. Sometimes they are laid near unpaid bills and grocery receipts. Sometimes they are carried for years by hands that have held too much to be gentle every day, but still knew how to unlock a door. The boss stood near the island, not quite ready to leave the kitchen. Their hands were dry now. The towel had taken the water from their fingers, but not the look of work from them. That stayed. It stayed in the knuckles, in the small bend of the back, in the way they looked at the counter as if checking one more thing no one else would notice. There was always one more thing. A crumb near the edge. A chair not pushed in. A light left on. A container needing a lid. A key too close to water. For a long time, that kind of attention may have felt like control. It may have made the room smaller. It may have sounded like correction, like impatience, like the old habit of noticing what was wrong before anyone could rest. But tonight, under one soft light, it also looked like care. Hired care. Care that had not always known how to be easy to receive. The house beyond the kitchen had settled into evening. A television murmured behind a wall, turned low enough that the words disappeared. Somewhere, someone shifted on a couch. A car passed outside, then faded down the street. The Sunday afternoon was gone now, but its traces were still here in the serving dishes, the damp towel, the phone turned over, the little exhaustion that comes after people leave. You were still standing beside someone who said very little. And the silence no longer felt as if it needed to be broken. That was the strange mercy of it. Nothing had been repaired in the way people sometimes hope things can be repaired. No hidden door opened. No old sentence finally arrived. No one became different enough to make the past simple. But the room had softened around what remained. The boss looked at the key, then at the dark window above the sink. Their reflection was faint there, blurred by the night outside and the kitchen light inside. For a second, they looked like both versions of themselves at once, the one who used to run the house with a tired voice, and the grandparent now standing at the edge of a quiet counter after washing dishes no one asked them to wash. Time had not made them easy. It had made them more visible. Maybe that was enough for this one evening. The worn key caught the light once when they touched it. Only once. A dull, brief shine moved across the metal, then disappeared. They did not pick it up this time. They only turned it slightly, the way someone might straighten a small thing before walking away. You watched that small movement. There was no speech for it. A speech would have been too much. It would have asked the moment to become larger than it wanted to be. So the room stayed with the hand, the key, the quiet phone, the old island, the faint smell of soap, and the softened feeling that had come without announcing itself. Nothing was fixed. But something stood differently beside the memory. Not forgiven into brightness. Not forgotten. Just less alone in the room. The boss stepped back from the island and turned off the faucet all the way, though it was already off. Then they stood there for one more breath, listening to the house they had spent so many years keeping. And in that breath, the ordinary ways people tried to love felt close enough to touch. The kitchen did not ask anyone to understand it perfectly. It only held what was left. The soft light over the island. The folded towel near the faucet. The phone, still face down. The worn house key resting in a dry place now, turned slightly toward the room. The boss had gone quiet again. But the quiet felt different after watching their hands move through the dishes, after seeing the key moved out of water, after standing close enough to notice care without a speech around it. Nothing had been fixed. The old memory stayed old. The missing word stayed missing. The years did not rearrange themselves into something clean. Still, the room felt less hard. Maybe warmth had always lived here in these small, ordinary ways. In a door unlocked. In a plate washed. In someone staying after everyone else drifted away. And for one breath, that was enough.